Dr. Sarah Mitchell pressed her stethoscope against the wounded soldier's chest, listening for signs of internal bleeding while mortar rounds exploded in the distance. The makeshift medical tent at Forward Operating Base Phoenix shook with each impact, sending surgical instruments rattling across metal tables. Pulses dropping, she called out to her partner, Dr. James Rodriguez, who was working frantically on another casualty just 3 feet away. I need 2 units of O-negative now. We're running low on blood supplies, James replied without looking up from his patient. His hands moved with practiced precision as he sutured a shrapnel wound that had torn through a young Marine's shoulder. Sarah, we might have to make some hard choices here. It was October 2015, and they'd been deployed to Afghanistan for 7 months. Both military doctors had volunteered for the deployment. Sarah because she believed in serving her country. James because he wanted to make a difference in the lives of soldiers far from home. They'd become an efficient team, able to communicate with just a glance during the chaos of combat medicine. Dr. Mitchell, Corpsman Jenkins burst through the tent flap. We've got incoming wounded from Sector 7. IED strike on a patrol convoy. Multiple casualties. ETA 5 minutes. Sarah looked at James, both thinking the same thing. They were already overwhelmed, medical supplies running dangerously low, and now more wounded were coming in. The nearest major medical facility was a 40-minute helicopter ride away, assuming they could get air support through the storm that had been raging for the past 6 hours. How many? James asked, applying pressure bandages to his patient. At least 8 wounded, sir. 3 critical. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, calculating in her head. They had space for maybe 4 more patients, enough morphine for 2 major procedures, and their surgical supplies were nearly exhausted from the morning's casualties. We'll make it work, she said finally. We always do. But 20 minutes later, as they worked on the incoming wounded, everything went wrong. The attack came without warning. Taliban fighters had infiltrated the perimeter during the storm, using the weather as cover to get closer to the base than anyone thought possible. The first explosion destroyed the generator, plunging the medical tent into darkness. The second took out the communications array. Everyone down. James shouted as automatic weapons fire erupted just outside their position. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and the portable defibrillator. We need to get the wounded to the bunker. But there was no time. Enemy fighters were already at the perimeter of the medical compound. Through the tent opening, Sarah could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, hear the shouts of American soldiers trying to establish a defensive line. James, she called out, we're cut off. The firefight lasted 4 hours. When it finally ended, 12 American soldiers were dead, and the Taliban had retreated into the mountains. But the base's communications were destroyed, their helicopter landing zone was damaged, and worst of all, Sarah and James were missing. They'd been separated from the main force during the initial attack, forced to retreat into the mountains with 2 wounded soldiers who couldn't be moved. Sergeant Mike Collins had taken shrapnel to his abdomen, and Private Danny Walsh had a compound fracture in his leg that required immediate attention. We can't stay here, James said, checking Collins' bandages by moonlight. They'd found shelter in a cave about 2 miles from the base, but Taliban search parties were still active in the area. They'll find us by morning. Sarah was working on Walsh's leg, trying to stabilize the fracture with materials from her field kit. Mike can't be moved. That shrapnel is too close to his liver. If we try to carry him over rough terrain, he'll bleed out, James finished. But if we stay here, we're all dead. That's when they heard voices approaching their hiding spot. Male voices, speaking in Pashto. James reached for his sidearm, but Sarah placed a hand on his wrist. Wait, she whispered. An elderly Afghan man appeared at the mouth of the cave, moving slowly with his hands visible. Behind him was a woman in traditional dress and a young girl, maybe 8 years old. The man spoke softly in broken English. American doctors? We help. Taliban gone, but more come morning. You come with us. Sarah and James exchanged glances. They were trained to be suspicious of local civilians. Too many soldiers had been killed by people pretending to help, but they were out of options. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "My name, Rahmat. This my wife, Amina, my daughter, Yasmin. I worked translator for Americans before. Know you helped my people many times." James studied the man's face in the dim light. There was something honest about his expression, something that reminded him of his own father's quiet dignity. "We have wounded men," Sarah said. "One very bad. Cannot walk." "We carry," Rahmat said simply. "Have donkey cart. Get you safe place." "Why would you help us?" James asked. "If Taliban find out." Rahmat was quiet for a moment, then said something in Pashto to his wife. She nodded and spoke back to him. "My son," Rahmat said finally. "He hurt bad 2 months ago. American doctors save his life. We no forget." The journey to Rahmat's village took 6 hours through mountain paths that seemed impossible to navigate in the darkness. But Rahmat knew every stone, every turn. His wife Amina walked beside the cart, holding little Yasmin's hand, never complaining despite the cold and the danger. They reached the village just before dawn, a cluster of mud brick houses hidden in a valley that didn't appear on any American military maps. Rahmat led them to his own home, where his extended family was waiting with blankets, hot tea, and medical supplies they'd somehow acquired. "You stay here," Rahmat said. "Taliban no come this village. We keep you safe." For 3 days, Sarah and James hid in Rahmat's home while Taliban search parties scoured the mountains looking for them. They treated their wounded soldiers with supplies that Rahmat's family had gathered, some from abandoned military outposts, some from sources Sarah preferred not to think about too carefully. Amina cooked for them, sharing what little food the family had. Yasmin, despite speaking no English, somehow communicated with the wounded soldiers through gestures and drawings, bringing smiles to their faces even in their pain. On the second night, James found Rahmat sitting outside, keeping watch. "Why?" James asked simply. Rahmat looked up at the stars. "In Quran, we say, whoever saves a life, it is as if he saved all of mankind. You save my son. I save you. It is simple, but you're risking your family. If Taliban find out you helped us, if I no help, I no longer man my wife and daughter can respect. Something's more important than safe." On the third night, American forces finally located them. A special operations team had been searching the mountains, following reports from local informants about a family that had been asking about medical supplies. When they found the village, they approached carefully, expecting an ambush. Instead, they found Rahmat waiting for them at the village entrance. "You come for American doctors?" he asked in his careful English. "They safe. I bring them to you." The evacuation happened quickly. Sarah and James gathered their gear, while Rahmat's family watched from their doorway. There wasn't time for long goodbyes. Intelligence reports suggested Taliban forces were closing in on the area. Sarah approached Amina and pressed something into her hands, her own medical insignia, a small pin that identified her as an army doctor. "Thank you," she said in English, then tried the Pashto phrase Rahmat had taught her, to shake her. Amina smiled and said something back in Pashto. She says, Rahmat translated, that Allah brought you to us for a reason. Maybe someday reason will be clear. James shook Rahmat's hand, looking into the eyes of the man who had risked everything to save 4 strangers. "If there's ever anything we can do," he said, "anything at all." "You live good lives," Rahmat replied. "Help other people like you help soldiers. That is enough." As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah watched the village disappear into the morning mist. She never expected to see Rahmat or his family again. 8 years later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was finishing her shift at Denver General Hospital when the trauma alert went off. "Multiple casualties incoming," the PA system announced. "Motor vehicle accident on I-25. 3 critical, ETA 4 minutes. All trauma staff to emergency." Sarah was exhausted. She'd been on duty for 14 hours, dealing with everything from heart attacks to gunshot wounds. But she grabbed her trauma gown and headed for the emergency bay, where Dr. James Rodriguez was already waiting. They'd ended up at the same hospital 2 years ago, not by design, but by the kind of coincidence that made them both believe in fate. Their experience in Afghanistan had bonded them in a way that transcended normal professional relationships. They could still communicate with a glance, still anticipate each other's moves during critical procedures. "What do we know?" Sarah asked, pulling on her gloves. "Family of 4. James replied, checking the trauma bay equipment. Head-on collision with a drunk driver. Father has multiple internal injuries. Mother has severe lacerations and possible spinal trauma. Daughter has broken ribs and a punctured lung. Ages: father 45, mother 38, daughter 16. The ambulance sirens were getting closer. Sarah checked her equipment one more time, running through procedures in her mind. After 8 years of civilian medicine, she'd learned to compartmentalize her emotions, to focus on the medical challenges without getting attached to individual patients. The ambulance bay doors burst open and paramedics rushed in with the first patient, a middle-aged man with obvious chest trauma and labored breathing. Multiple rib fractures, possible hemothorax. The paramedic reported as they transferred him to the trauma table. Blood pressure dropping, pulse weak and rapid. Sarah moved quickly, cutting away the patient's shirt to assess his injuries. As she worked, something nagged at her, something familiar about the man's face, though she couldn't place it. "I need a chest tube tray," she called out, "and get me 2 units of O-negative." The second ambulance arrived with the mother and daughter. James took the daughter, a teenage girl who was conscious but struggling to breathe. The mother was unconscious, with serious head trauma that would require immediate surgery. "Sarah," James called out, "I need help over here." She glanced over while maintaining pressure on her patient's chest wound. The teenage girl was looking at her with dark eyes that seemed remarkably calm given the circumstances. "My father," the girl said in accented English. "Please help my father." "We're helping everyone," Sarah assured her. "What's your name?" "Yasmin," the girl replied. "Yasmin Ahmadi." Sarah's hand stopped moving for just a moment. Yasmin. The name hit her like a physical blow, bringing back memories of a little 8-year-old girl in Afghanistan who had drawn pictures for wounded soldiers. She looked more carefully at her patient, really looked at his face for the first time. Older now, grayer, but the bone structure was unmistakable. The same gentle eyes, the same quiet dignity, even in unconsciousness. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Sarah?" James called. "Everything okay?" She couldn't speak. Her patient was Rahmat. The man who had saved their lives 8 years ago in Afghanistan was lying on her trauma table, dying from injuries that mirrored the wounds they treated on American soldiers in that makeshift field hospital. "James," she said, her voice barely controlled. "James, look at the daughter." He glanced over, then did a double take. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same features as the little girl who had brought them drawings and silent comfort during those 3 days of hiding. "No way," he breathed. "It's them," Sarah confirmed. "It's Rahmat and his family." For a moment, both doctors stood frozen by the impossibility of it. What were the odds that the Afghan family who had saved their lives would end up in their emergency room 8 years later? But there was no time for shock or coincidence. Rahmat's blood pressure was continuing to drop, and Yasmin was struggling with her breathing. "We saved them," Sarah said, echoing Rahmat's words from that night in the cave, "just like they saved us." The next 6 hours were the most intense of either doctor's career. Rahmat had internal bleeding that required immediate surgery. Amina had a traumatic brain injury that needed delicate neurosurgical intervention. Yasmin had a collapsed lung that required a chest tube. Sarah and James worked with an intensity born of more than professional duty. This wasn't just about medicine anymore. It was about honor, about completing a circle that had begun in the mountains of Afghanistan. "Talk to me, Sarah," James said as they worked on Rahmat in surgery. "His spleen is lacerated worse than we thought. I can save it. Sarah replied, her hands moving with precision despite the emotional weight of the moment. I have to save it. She thought about Rahmat's words at night in Afghanistan. Some things more important than safe. He had risked his family's lives to save four strangers. Now it was her turn to take risks for him. The surgery took 4 hours. When they finally emerged from the OR, Yasmin was waiting in the family area. Her chest tube stabilized, her breathing improved. She looked up at them with the same brave expression she'd worn as a child. "My father?" she asked simply. "He's alive," Sarah said, sitting down beside her. "Your mother is in surgery now, but she's going to be okay too." Yasmin nodded, then looked more carefully at Sarah's face. Recognition dawned slowly. "You are the American doctor," she said quietly, "from Afghanistan. You stayed in our house." Sarah smiled, remembering the little girl who had drawn pictures of flowers and birds for the wounded soldiers. "You drew me a picture of a mountain." "I still have it," Yasmin said. "My father, he always said you would meet again. He said Allah brought us together for a reason." James sat down on Yasmin's other side. "How did you end up in Colorado?" "Refugee program," Yasmin explained. "After you left, Taliban came to village. They know my father helped Americans. We had to leave everything. It took 3 years, but finally we got visas to come to America. And you've been here how long?" 5 years. My father drives taxi now. My mother cleans offices. I am in high school. I want to be doctor like you." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. This family had lost everything because they'd chosen to help American soldiers. They'd been forced to flee their homeland, start over in a foreign country. And now, they were here in her emergency room. "Yasmin," she said, "there's something you should know. Your father saved our lives in Afghanistan. If it weren't for him, James and I would have died in those mountains." Yasmin smiled, the same radiant smile Sarah remembered from 8 years ago. He never told us that part. He just said he helped some Americans who were hurt. Over the next week, Sarah and James visited the Ahmadi family every day. Rahmat recovered slowly but steadily. Amina's brain injury was serious, but not permanent. Yasmin healed quickly, resilient like her father. On the day they were discharged, Rahmat asked to speak privately with Sarah and James. "I want to thank you," he said, his English much improved after 5 years in America. "But also I want to say something else." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "In Afghanistan, I helped you because it was the right thing to do, but also because American doctors saved my son's life. I felt debt that must be paid." Sarah started to interrupt, but Rahmat held up his hand. "Now you saved my family's life. So debt is paid both ways. But I think maybe debt is not right word. I think word is family. You are family now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, Sarah's medical insignia, the one she'd given to Amina 8 years ago. "My wife. She carried this every day since Afghanistan. She said it brought good luck, kept family safe. Now she wants you to have it back, but not because we no longer need it. Because she says you need to remember that family is not just blood. Family is people who risk everything for each other." Sarah took the insignia with shaking hands. It was tarnished now, worn from years of being carried in Amina's pocket, but it was still recognizable. "There's something else," James said. "Sarah and I have been talking. We know Yasmin wants to be a doctor." "Yes," Rahmat said proudly. "She is very smart, gets good grades. We'd like to help," Sarah continued. "Medical school is expensive, but between the two of us, we can make sure she gets there." Rahmat's eyes filled with tears. The first time the doctor had seen him show such emotion. "You already saved her life," he said quietly. "Now you want to save her future too?" "Your family saved us 8 years ago," James replied. "It's time we return the favor." "But more than that," Sarah added, "Yasmin is going to be an excellent doctor. She has her father's courage and her mother's compassion. The world needs doctors like that." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the gallery of Denver General's main auditorium. watching the hospital's annual award ceremony. James was beside her, both of them wearing their dress uniforms for the first time since Afghanistan. This year's Community Service Award, the hospital administrator announced, goes to the Ahmadi family for their ongoing volunteer work with refugee families and their inspiring story of resilience and service. Rahmat, Amina, and Yasmin walked onto stage. Rahmat looked uncomfortable in his borrowed suit, but his family beamed with pride. As he accepted the award, he spotted Sarah and James in the gallery and gave them a small nod of acknowledgement. "When my family came to America," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, "we had nothing but hope. But we learned that America is not just a place. It is the idea that strangers can become family, that helping others makes us all stronger, that kindness has no borders." He paused, looking directly at Sarah and James. "We also learned that some debts cannot be repaid, only passed forward. So we try every day to help other families like ours, to be the help we needed when we first arrived." After the ceremony, the four of them, plus Amina, whose English was still limited but whose smile needed no translation, gathered in the hospital cafeteria. "So," James said to Yasmin, "are you ready for the MCAT?" "I think so," she replied, "but I am nervous." "Don't be," Sarah said. "You're going to do great. And remember, you've got the best recommendation letters 2 doctors can write." "What kind of doctor do you want to be?" James asked. Yasmin thought for a moment. "Emergency medicine, like you. I want to help people in their worst moments. Show them that someone cares, just like your father taught you," Sarah observed. Rahmat smiled, the same quiet smile he'd worn that night in Afghanistan when he'd agreed to risk everything for 4 strangers. "She learns from best teachers," he said. "Life teaches courage, but you too taught her that courage with medical knowledge can save worlds." As they sat together in the busy hospital cafeteria, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a level 1 trauma center, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all to this moment. 8 years ago, in a cave in Afghanistan, none of them could have imagined they'd be sitting together in Colorado, planning Yasmin's medical career. But Rahmat had been right that night when he quoted the Quran about saving lives. When you save someone, you don't just save them. You save everyone they'll go on to help, everyone they'll touch, every life they'll make better. Yasmin would become a doctor. She'd save lives, train other doctors, maybe even serve in places where medical care was desperately needed. The ripple effects of Rahmat's decision to help 4 American soldiers would continue for generations. "You know what I think?" Sarah said, looking around the table at these people who had become her chosen family. "I think your father was wrong about one thing. Yasmin." "What's that?" He said the debt was paid. But there is no debt between family. There's just love and the promise to always be there for each other. Rahmat nodded slowly. "In Afghanistan, we have saying, the wound of words is worse than the wound of swords. But I think opposite is also true. The healing of kindness is stronger than any medicine." 2 years later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell received a text message that made her smile. "Yasmin Ahmadi, MCAT score 520. Medical school, here we come. Thank you for believing in me. Love, your Afghan sister." She showed the message to James, who was reviewing patient charts beside her in the emergency department where they still work together. "Think she'll be okay in medical school?" he asked. Sarah looked around the trauma bay where they'd first recognized Rahmat and his family, where the impossible circle had finally closed. "Are you kidding?" she said. "She's got the best possible foundation. She learned courage from her father, compassion from her mother, and medicine from us. But most importantly, she learned that being a doctor isn't just about fixing bodies. It's about fixing the world one patient at a time. Just like her family taught us," James observed. "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "In Afghanistan, we thought we were saving them. Turns out they were saving us all along." And in the mountains of Afghanistan, in a village that no longer appeared on any maps, in the memory of a little girl who drew pictures of flowers for wounded soldiers, the circle of kindness continued to grow one life at a time.